Hi, I'm Rick Dior. Today we're going to start a series on studio recording. The setup is one of the most important things an engineer can do for the session, and you always want to do this before the musicians get here. You don't want to be setting up when there's musicians here. The reason for that is twofold. First of all, when there's people moving around, it's hard for you to move around and things get knocked over and it's difficult. And most importantly, you don't want musicians coming into the studio and sitting around for hours at a time. I'm usually up and running in about 15 minutes when the musicians come. That means we can start recording our first tune. Normally, I'm waiting on them to get everything set up and tuned up and ready to go. Now, today I'll be showing you mic setup for this particular session. So I'll show you how I run the lines, check the lines, what mics I'm going to use. I'll also show you how I use the headphone mixers that I like. So we will be using my isolation booths for tomorrow's session, and you'll see the way I have these set up. They're triangulated, so I have one big room and then two booths within sight of the big room so everybody can see each other. So I try not to use video monitors when possible. So the next thing you'll see here, I will show you how I lay out the room. So just give me a minute and get a few things set up, and then we'll shoot some video. Okay, so let's talk setup. Now, like I said earlier, I've decided to use some isolation, or the band leader did, so we could fix things. Now, by that, I mean, if there's a problem in the track and everything else is great, but there's one bad bass note, or something happens somewhere with one of the solos or sax solo or whatever, it can be fixed without redoing the whole tune. All right, but if everybody was in one room, that would not be possible. So I'll go through the setup and my thought behind it. This is the view, like I showed you earlier, from the guitarist's point of view, and right there, straight ahead, that's where the bass player will be. So they'll be able to see each other and hear each other through headphones. Then right next to them, or the guitar player, I should say, him or her, I'm not sure, is the sax players, two of them. Now I've decided not to separate them just because they need a lot of communication. Intonation can be difficult, especially if one's playing soprano, one's playing tenor or alto. They need to be able to hear each other acoustically as well. So I'm going to put them straight up together, and all they have to do is look right, and they'll see the bass player in the room there, and the guitar player, and then look straight ahead and they'll see the drummer in this booth here. Now, all the music stands should have some kind of, especially if you're using an instrument like that blows air and sound out a bell, like a trumpet, trombone, or saxophone, you should coat the music stands with something. This is an extra large music stand, and you can get these carpet squares. They're like basically free. They're like samples from a carpet store. I went into one and I just paid the guy $20 and he gave me like 10 of these things. And I just put them on the stand so the stand it won't vibrate then. It won't ring. Some of these stands are made of metal and they will ring. So all the stands will have these tomorrow for the session. This may be a little close, so one may have to get off the carpet. I do believe in area rugs, because what happens if someone's tapping their foot really loud, that will translate on that wood floor to sound, and you don't want that. So you want to get some area rugs, just different ones where you can place down, all right? Especially, obviously, under the drums. But every surface where all the musicians are playing will have some sort of area rug. And it's good to have a wood floor, obviously, because it sounds good. But a lot of, like with cello and stuff, you just use the pin and a safety thing that connects to the chair, and the pin just goes in that so it doesn't destroy the floor. But, you get a lot of foot tappers. So that is the logic behind my setup. Here's a old Mackie 1202. These make great mixers for headphones. And what I do is I send the auxes out. So I have 8 auxes. I'll send every one of those out, and each one of these knobs will be something different. So probably this first knob will be guitar, then we'll have bass in the second one, and then one of the sax players, another sax player, and then drums, usually stereo mixed, and then maybe bring up some reverb. If they want to hear it, they can just turn up the channel if they want that. in the other 7 and 8 stereo. So 8 channels is a good way to go with this. All right, you don't have to, but I would recommend it. Other systems like Aviums are great. They're just super expensive, and then you got to run Cat5 cable. This is just regular tip ring sleeve. Nothing to it. These are easy to wire yourself. All the cabling in the studio I did myself. Everything. And wire now is very expensive. So, and then things just run in the walls. And they run to the other side. So the least amount of floor wiring, you have to have some, obviously, but that's what you want to do. So that's my logic behind the setup. And this is the view that the drummer will see. So he'll see the guitar player, the sax players, and if he looks to his left, then he'll see the bass player in this room. Okay, so next we're going to talk about running the lines and choosing microphones. So before I show you the actual mics, I want to show you how I do this. This is a setup sheet that I use for all sessions. Hopefully you can see it. I'm not sure you'll be able to, but I may do a copy and just post it on the screen. If you can read my sloppy handwriting, I basically plan everything out. I have certain ways I do things. All engineers are different, where they put the drums, where they put everything else. I like to leave my top channels open, because a lot of times for overdubs and stuff, that's where I do them. And sometimes I start there on the second row, which would be channels 9 through 16 and 17 through 24. I can record 32 channels at once, in fact, live. I rarely will ever record that many channels. I don't think I've ever done that. Obviously, with computers now, you can mix or edit or anything, unlimited tracks. But this is just recording live, in other words, the preamps I use. So what I do is I write down the instrument, the mic I choose to use, and the preamp that it's running to. Obviously, what channel it's on, so I know how to patch the patch bay. So that's what I do there. And that's the first thing you want to do before you do anything. So these will be the saxophone mics I'm going to use. I'm going to use 2 U89s. This is an older Neumann mic. It's not tube, it's solid state. These are wonderful microphones. Not very colored, so if the musicians are good, as these are, and they have a good sound, this is the kind of mic you want to use. It's a large diaphragm, or basically mid-size diaphragm. And I'm using 2 of them. And then I'm also using an old ribbon mic. This is an RCA 44. Wes Dooley from AEA rebuilt this for me many, many, many years ago. I think they sell these now. They mass produce them. But this particular mic is about 25 years old. Not the mic itself. The actual mic and everything is about 80 years old. So these are the mics I used back for radio in the 1940s and through the 50s. So this is a ribbon mic. It's got a large ribbon and a giant magnet, and it's always a figure 8 pattern, which means it picks up from the front and the back equally and basically ignores the sides. Now this is a very dark mic, as some ribbon mics are. And it's a great complement to these U89s, which can be a hair bright, but they have tons of detail. So I'll usually mix this in. It's got a really big front lobe as well as a back lobe. And like I said, rejects the sides. Now, one thing you need to do if you use a figure 8 mic on isolated instruments, because it's not a very isolating mic, is I just do this. I take a windscreen, a pop screen, and I put a piece of foam, and that negates the back pickup of that figure 8 pattern, because in back of that, not too close, but is the drum booth, and I'm sure they're not going to play very loud. If it's a rock session, I would not use this setup. For a jazz session, it's okay. And with these doors closed, it's probably going to be pretty well isolated, especially with this piece of foam on there. What you do is you just tape it like that, like I did there. And a lot of times I'll wrap a piece of string around it too. All right, pretty simple stuff. That's just a vocal pop filter. Everybody knows what that is. So that is my sax setup, starting out. Now, if there's something they want to hear that they don't like, or something else they're hearing, I will not hesitate to swap out a mic, change my plan. Okay, you got to be able to do that quickly. And the musician is always right, just like the customer is always right. They have a sound they want to hear, and it's your job to get that. Now, I may need to do a little bit of phase work on these since there's two sax players, and sometimes together that can get a little phasey. So just make sure you have the ability to delay a particular mic. Most modern digital consoles and obviously programs have that. So you may need to delay one mic to the other. The benefit of this is there's two saxes. They'll play the heads together, but pretty sure when they're soloing, I can mute one of these mics. So that was part of the choice of having the sax players in the same room and not isolated. But for the heads, you're going to need to make sure your phase. And phase is time arrival to the mics. So this trio of mics, they're going to pick up the sound in different ways. So you may need to kind of look at that on the phase meter, which is what I do. And obviously use your ears. What phase can do, it makes things sound flangey, like, you know, the phaser effect. So it's whoosh, whoosh. And also you lose all your low end, which can definitely be a problem. So if you can reverse the phase and just check each mic, that's a really quick way of figuring out. Now you can't do that with headphones, because remember, headphones, you're using each ear separately, binaural. So unless there's a hole in your head and you have nothing in there between your ears, you're not going to hear stereo. So you need to check phase with speakers. That's a big mistake people make. One thing you might want to do is when you make or purchase your mic cables is use different color wire. So I make my own, and I always have several spools of, this is Mogami they should say, it's an oxygen free mic cable. I'm not a cable nut, but I've always used this. It's very easy to work with and solder, that's why I like it. So you see the different colors. I got a red here, a blue there, and then a black cable here. And that makes it easy if you have to track down any problems quickly. You can just see the color and trace the cable. Because once everything is taped down, it becomes very difficult. So this is, you could just see it right away. So different setups, like so the sax setup, I use 3 different colors on 3 different mics. On the guitar setup, the same thing, and the bass likewise. Now on the drums, you quickly run out of colors. So I'll probably just use all black cables for that. But this is how I normally do it. So that might be something you could do. The other thing you could do is just color code the ends of the, you could put a little nail polish on there. So the XLR connectors, some people do that. I just like the cables because it's easier to see. So this is the guitar setup. So this is a direct box, better known as a DI. I'm sure most of you know what this is. But if you don't, I'll go over it quickly. This is a Demeter direct box, a much older direct box. It's a tube, I believe it uses a 12AX7. So it's a good sounding direct box. You can also buy cheaper solid state units. So most direct boxes, the purpose is to enable a musician to use an amplifier as well as be mic'd. Input the instrument into this thing that says input. Normally that's a 1/4 inch mono plug, tip sleeve, not tip ring sleeve. And then you'll go out to the amplifier. Okay? So you have to run 2 tip sleeve cables. And then what happens is you could run out of the direct box into your mic panel. So this is an XLR, and that's what that looks like. That is a male XLR. So you take the female end, put it in there. I'm going to do this while I'm holding the camera. And that goes to your mic panel. And anything plugged into this DI, the guitar being the instrument that we're going to use tomorrow, will go to the mic panel. And then what a direct box does basically is splits the signal. Now some have this boost that you can add maybe 5 to 10 dBs, that's decibels, to the signal. Unity means it's flat, it's not adding anything. I'll leave it there if depends on his pickups and how noisy or not noisy the amp and the guitar is. I might use that. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It's very simple. All studios should have several of these. I'll show you one I'm going to use on the bass in a minute that's really fancy. So what happens is we run that XLR out of there into the panel, the mic panel. So that's here, and that will be the male end, and then the mic panel is here. Showed you this earlier, and that's where we've already got our saxophone inputs. All right, now let's walk over and I'll show you the microphone setup that I'm using to mic the amp. So when I run that signal, in other words, the guitar is hooked up to the direct box, which runs the signal to the amp, which will be here on these steps. I like using this little hallway that goes up to my percussion studio for amplifiers. It really sounds good, and it isolates everything from the rest of the room. So this way we can have the guitar player's amp isolated so it's not a problem leaking into those sax mics. So I'm going to mic this in stereo, the amp, and I use 2 different kinds of mics. So we're not necessarily going for a stereo left-right signal, although we can do that. What we're going for is tone variations. This first mic is called a Royer 121. It's an older ribbon mic, not as old as the RCA's obviously. But this particular mic I got in the early 2000s. They now make a phantom powered version, which is a lot hotter as far as output. You need a lot to drive these mics, any ribbon mic, so you need a quiet preamp. So this is it's a very dark, not very dark, but darker kind of mic, great for jazz guitar. And this other mic I'm using is a Sennheiser MKH 800. This is a wonderful microphone. These are like little Swiss Army knives for anything. So these are small diaphragm condenser mics. And you see here all the switching options we have. So you have your patterns, anything from Omni to figure 8, 5 patterns. You have a high pass filter, which means you can cut the low end. And really rare on a microphone as this, it's actually a gain, a high gain, which you could add +3 or +6 decibels at 8 kilohertz, which is up there. And then, of course, you have your pad here, where you can pad the mic down, which is useful for a guitar amp. Minus, I think that says 6 and -12. All right, so high pass filter, that's -3 or -6 dBs at 50 hertz. Then your high peak, where you can raise it. And then you have here your pad and your pattern selection. So really, really useful mic that you can change the sound of it once it's set up without having to dial in EQ. And of course EQ is a form of phase distortion, so I like getting my sounds from the mic. Alright, so that will be where the amp will be, and it'll be mic'd with these 2 mics. So after you're done patching, as you see there, just tape everything down and use gaffer's tape, not duct tape. Gaffer's tape does not leave residue if you get it up within a couple weeks. So you see all these cables, just tape them down. Musicians are clumsy, I can attest to that. People will grab stuff with their foot and then the mic will come down That's just better. So make sure you do that. Don't just leave a bunch of cables on the ground, okay? And just tape it where all the access points lead out to. Now, one thing I forgot to tell you before I talk about these gobos. They're called go-betweens. So I have a number of these I built in the studio. Here's one, this big one, and one side's wood, one side's soft. So that can either be fiberglass wrapped with cloth, as you see this, one of these walls in my studio is. And also, you know, the hard end is wood. And this one's these gobos roll. They're a little diffuse. You see that? So I'm moving this because the guitar, even though it's going to be not an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, it does make sound when you play it. You'll hear the little tinny string sound. I'm not sure what kind of guitar this guy has, but it's probably a jazz guitar. So I would say it's going to make some kind of sound. So you want to be able to separate that from the saxes, which will be here. Now on the sax side, I want mostly soft. So you see this back wall, and then the other side of the gobo is this Orient foam, because those tend to make everything resonate in the room. So it's a little drier over here. Still sounds good. You have this ISO booth, little window there. Make sure that doesn't interfere, and then the soft ceiling and a carpet. Okay, so acoustically, you need to be aware of your environment. An instrument like a saxophone puts out a lot of sound, a lot of different frequencies, and it can sound funny if you're not careful. Okay, so that's important to think about. So I've gotten pretty much wired here in the main room, and the next stop is going to be the drum room. So let's talk a little about panels real quick. This is a drum panel here, and that goes into the wall, and then it's parallel wired with this main panel that I showed you before. All these other little panels here lead to different spots in the studio. These go upstairs, these go to the opposite wall, so I don't have to run a bunch of cable on the floor, and this is the main panel that goes to the control room, and they're parallel wired. Now you don't want to use two channels at once, but you know, you just make sure you're not doing that. Okay, and then this panel here that's parallel wired, I'm going to run particular channels that aren't plugged in anywhere else, and then patch them on the console. So that's how I'll do this particular drum room. So what I'm going to do, since the drums aren't here, I'm going to patch all the mics, get them all ready, and when he comes in, then we would set those up. So I've got the drums roughed in here. I'll tell you what I'm using. On the toms, I think he probably only has 2 toms, but I have an extra just in case here. I'm using these old Sennheiser MD409 U3s. These are the really old ones. They have a new version of this. Not sure how it sounds, but the old ones are great. They're hypercardioid. They're great for drums, also great on guitar amps. They have a little tiny boost around 5K, but they're very big sounding microphones. So I have about 6 of these. I own about 6 of these. But here we'll just use 2 of those. Then on overheads, like I said earlier, we're going to use these Beyer 740s. These are really, really good overhead mics. And you can probably find a used pair. They're pretty expensive. But these are condenser mics, multi-pattern. We'll probably start with these in cardioid. Then on the hi-hat, I normally don't dial in too much of a hi-hat mic because the overheads capture a lot of that. But we're going to use this Schoeps CMC6. Again, it's a hypercardioid capsule. You can change the capsules. This one's a hypercardioid. So it just captures basically what's in front of it, rejects the sides, and has a little node in the rear. That's usually not a problem. Then on the snare drum, which is really important if there's brush playing going on, I'm using this Sennheiser MKH80. It's the older version of the 800. I'll show you that. It's black, and the 800s are silver. Same controls as I showed you in the guitar amp. And here I'm going to put it on hypercardioid, and I'm going to roll off a little of the low end, and maybe add a little bit of top end, which sounds great for the brushes. So you don't want to place this right on the snare. It's not like a rock and roll thing. A little bit away. And on bass drum, I'm just going to start here with a Beta 52. I probably will end up changing that out for another Schoeps with a cardioid capsule. The Beta 52 is an inexpensive. It's about $150 used. So compared to the rest of these mics, which are very, very expensive, this is cheap. But it's actually a really, really good mic to use in front of a jazz bass drum that's got 2 heads, no hole. It really captures the bass drum. So it's a great deal. And there's also the D112, which is here. That sounds a little bit different. That's better, in my opinion, for rock. So here's the bass setup. I'm going to use a couple different mics on the bass player. We have a Neumann TLM 193, which is a cardioid-only mic. It's a nice sounding mic, pretty neutral. And then we have another Sennheiser MKH 800. And this is a useful mic. I'm going to put this on hypercardioid. And we're going to roll some of the low end off because of the proximity effect when you get close. And this mic's going to be pretty close to the sound hole on the bass, where the TLM is going to be a little farther away. So a combination of these mics mixed sounds really, really good. And then also, I'm going to set up this direct box. This is a Manley tube direct interface. And I really like this for bass. There's several settings that are roll-offs. I like the bass medium setting. And this is a tube direct box. I've had this for years and years. And it's a really nice sounding, for DI, nice sounding instrument. Now, if he doesn't have a pickup and all that, then this will not be used, obviously. So that's there just in case. I don't know what his setup is, but most bass players leave their pickup on the bass, and a lot of them have a really good one. So it's worth recording that. Normally I will not use too much of it, but just a little hint gives tremendous low end because of where that pickup is on the bass, right on the bridge there. All right, so that's our setup, and here's this little mic panel in this room. And you see it there, and that goes again to the patch bay. So here you have a TT bay, telephone type. I'm not sure if that's what TT stands for, but in the old days, the operators would patch things in, and that's where the patch bay was born. Lots of studios use it, different versions. So these are the tiniest plugs. You see one right here. And that way you can get a lot more channels in a small space. The trade-off is they're a pain in the neck to wire. Now normally when you order patch bays, you can get things normaled in different ways. In other words, if nothing's plugged into it, parts of that bay are normaled, so when you solder it, you don't need to do anything. But once you break that connection, in other words, plug the cable in, that's breaking the normal, and then you plug it into something else and patch it to that. And that's how it works. Okay, and if you have a studio with a lot of equipment, analog equipment like I do, you need a patch bay. Otherwise you're crawling around underneath the console, which is ridiculous. So a lot of times during a session, I'll change things if something's not working, if there's a problem with something, then I'll change that. So that's how that works. Now I have different colors of these as well. Red, yellow, black. So, oh, that's blue, sorry. And here's black. So that way I can trace a connection really quick, because once this gets patched, as you'll see, it's very, very crowded. All right, so what I'm going to do now, actually, let me show you my patch bay diagram. This changes all the time, but something I just did in Excel. But over the years, when I swap out equipment, I'll change it. But this is a patch bay diagram. And this tells you where everything is, because you're going to forget. So you see up there, it's studio mic outputs. The top there is the Grace, that's the Grace preamp. Then different preamps, and that's how you patch. All right, and there's 4 preamps. 4 patch bays, so lots and lots of channels. And not all of them are used, so it's expandable. I just have to take them out, solder new connections, and I'm good to go. All right, so what we'll do is we'll start patching things, and I'm going to put this right here. Hopefully you'll be able to see. And I'm going to start out, and I'll talk you through it, what I'm going to be doing. So you need your track sheet, remember this, for this, and whatever you did, you need to patch it. So we'll start with the guitar, because that's on the top row, and it says guitar amp, this is what I wrote, mic 1, MKH80, which is the mic, and the preamp, which is a Great River preamp. So they're similar to the old Neves. The old Neves are great, but they're noisy. These are like the old Neves with transformers, but they're not noisy. So we'll use that. And so the channel would be 5. That's the mic panel, this middle row here. And then I would patch that into the Great River preamp. Now I have different length TT cables, so this one's got to go a long way, so we'll use a longer one. And we'll go out of 5 and then into this Great River 3. And then I look on my chart there and I trace it down. So you need to be organized and have all this. This takes a lot of time to organize. But once you get it, it's there for good. So I figure out that the Great River 3 preamp starts on 21 in, and that's the top row there. And then out is right next to it. And then I go out of that into my channel that's going to go to my recording device, which in this case will be channel 5. There. Okay, and that's how it's done. It's pretty easy, and then if I have to patch in any outboard gear, I will insert that into the channel and then go from there and out of there into wherever I want to be. It's very simple. But you see how this could save you, and does save you, a ton of time using this patch bay. We'll do one more for you. The guitar amp, the Royer, which was that ribbon mic, that's right next to it. So that you'll go out of 6 there, and then you'll go into Great River 4, which is next to there, and out of there into the channel that's going to come up on the radar system and my computer. So that's channel 6, which is there. And that's it. So after we wire all this, then I test every single channel, and I'll show you how I do that in a minute. So I'm going to wire it up, and then we'll test everything out. So it's a couple minutes later, and I am all done. You see, it looks like a bunch of spaghetti. Now, I use a different color so I can tell what's what. So if I'm tracing a particular line, I keep it the same color. That helps a lot since it's so small. So I'm dealing with a number of preamps here. I'm using this Grace preamp, this NTI, the Great Rivers over there, and an API 4-channel preamp for this session. So the next step is to go through and turn on the phantom power. And so if it's a condenser mic and it's not tube, which has its own power supply, it's going to need phantom power. You don't want to supply phantom power to a ribbon mic, and you don't need it for dynamic mics. So if I go through this Grace preamp, in other words, I know that the guitar, channel 3, is phantom powered, so just go ahead and we'll turn that on. And now channel 4 this is a ribbon mic. I'm not going to turn that phantom power on, but I'm going to turn up the channel because that is a low output mic. So you see I'm doing that there. And then the DIs, that's going to be on Grace 7. That's all good right there. Okay? No phantom power for that. So that's how this goes. You just turn on the phantom power as you need it on the particular preamp. So what we're going to do is do all that, and then what I do is I set up a very loud radio. Actually, it's an iPod with a big speaker, and I move that in the room, and I'll test these mics to make sure they're working, and then I'll record some audio and leave it all on for about a half hour and see if there's any clicks or pops or any issues like that. Sometimes I use a lot of old microphones, and I'm not using a lot of old tube microphones for this session, but sometimes I do, like the U47s and U49s, and those sometimes will make some funny sounds, I guess just from old age. So got to be careful and trace that down before the players get here, because sometimes you won't notice that those sounds are there until you're mixing down your isolating channel. So it's important to make sure everything's clean. So the next step will be to set up that speaker and to turn on all the phantom power, and also we will route everything to the computer, and I'll show you how I do that, and the radar system so we can monitor. So like I said earlier, think of a console, especially a digital console, as a giant switch box. So this is an old DM2000 Yamaha. This thing's very old. I guess it's bordering on almost 20 years old now. It's been great, not too many problems with it. Like I said, I do not use the internal preamps. Everything's extra. Basically, it just routes everything. It's kind of like a digital router. And I like the tactile mixing, so I can feel a fader and move it, unlike a computer screen. So this is hooked up digitally through these radar converters and then out of the radar into the computer. So I can literally record 2 sets of 24 track at 96K, which is a high sample rate, and a high bit rate, 24 bit, at once. So there's redundancy. If there's a problem with one machine, the other machine is still there. Also, you have layers on these consoles. So you see how those faders are moving. I'm touching a group of faders. So that's 1 through 24, 25 through 48, 49 through 72, 73 through 96, and that's my master layer. So you have all these channels, over 100 channels of things, and each channel does something different. So what we're going to do now is route everything that I just patched into Patch Bay with this console. So the first thing you do is go to the layer that's going to be active, which is that layer, and then turn the channels on. So the first thing we're going to do is test the saxophone mics. And if you remember correctly, those mics were in channels 9, 10, and 11. So you simply patch those there, you bring them up so they're active, and then on your computer and the radar, which turns around here, show you that. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but you just arm the tracks. I have a small screen here for that and my big computer screen, and you arm them as well on the computer. So that way your everything is armed and routed. Okay? So then the next thing I do is I will go in the other room, and I have this very loud boombox, and I'll just play a click through it, because on YouTube, if you use any kind of music, there's going to be trouble. So I've learned my lesson that way. So I'll just have a click going, and just stand by, and we'll turn that on. So I've gone ahead and turned the click track on in the studio, and that's coming out of a speaker. And you see there I have meters. So if we turn the channels on, you have signal. Now I'm sure the saxophones will be louder than that, but that gives me a good idea of, that the channels are working, and I can see the levels of the mics relative to each other. I can also check for phase if I record the mics, and then, well, you know what, let me just show you. So I'll record this, I'll move this, and you see the DAW there. Let me raise this up here. Hopefully that comes out. It's hard to videotape computer screens. So I'll hit record. And now that's running. And so once you record these 3 tracks with a click, you can actually see the delay if you zoom in. And I make note of those delays, so if there's a problem, I can go back and fix it. So by delaying one of the channels, usually by about 7 or 8 milliseconds. So let's turn that off, and let's turn this off. And then you see the waveform here. Okay, so that's what the click looks like when you record it. I had one of these channels in stereo. And then if you really zoom in, now this first channel, channel 9, that's the ribbon mic. See how much softer it is? So I'll have to give that more gain because it's not a condenser mic, so it takes a lot of juice to run that thing. So I'll boost that up a little. and we'll even these things out. And then you can see the delay. If you zoom in, it's not bad. It's right there. It's about 4 milliseconds. So that's easy to fix by just delaying one channel later on. So these are the kinds of things that are good to do. So if there's a problem, you know why. And these are good to do when you're setting up, not during the session. So that's 3 channels that we've got, and you see the radar is still going there. The meters, okay, on my little tiny monitor. So metering, you don't want to mix by that, but it's a great visual representation of what's going on. Now on the console, that comes up like that, if you have a meter bridge. And if I had effects on that, it would come up in different channels. Like, so if I had reverb on it, it would come up in my reverb returns. We won't get too complicated here, but when we do the headphones here in a minute, I'll show you how that is used. So we'll just pause for a minute, and I'm going to check the rest of these mics. So I checked all the mics. Everything works. Had a little noise on one of the mics. Turned out to be a little bit of dirt in the patch bay. So I went ahead and cleaned the whole patch bay. I do that every once in a while. And sometimes, you know, it gets a little oxidized in there. There's a good thing called a plug cleaner, which you can, I'll show it to you. It looks like this. It's a little TT tip and uses Doe's plug polish. Put it on there, put it in there, twist, and it removes any oxidation and make sure the contact is good. I try to clean it every couple months. It's a lot of work, actually, to do it. So we're good there. So let's get to the headphones now. Now this is the most confusing part when I try to teach my assistant engineers how I have this set up. They get a little confused just because if they're not used to a digital console, how it works with the layers, it can be confusing. So to explain, you go to this master layer, and hopefully you can see it on the camera, but if you can't, I have aux 1, aux 2, aux 3, aux 4. So aux 1 to aux 8 routed through the console. So as I send the signals on my auxes, they return here. That's how that works. So on this layer, the recording layer, if I hit aux 1 like that and hit that, we clear it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this and hit the auxes and clear everything and start over. So we'll start out with something simple, 4 auxes. So on aux 1, let's say on the mixer we want guitar. We'll just do it in mono for now. So all we do is we go to this layer and we turn up the guitar settings. So that would be channels 5, 6, and 7. Now we're feeding the aux. So this is the send. And that send goes to the headphones, the headphone amp. All right? And then we go to aux 2, and we want to bring up the saxes. So this is the sax aux. So that's 9, 10, and 11. All right, and then we go to aux 3, and that's the bass aux. So we'll bring up 14, 15, and 16. And finally, aux 4 will be the drums, and we bring up 17 through 23. So when we look at that, it looks like this. Aux 1, which is guitar, aux 2, which is bass, aux 3, which is saxophones, and aux 4 is drums. So those are my sends. Now, what you have to do is go to the master layer, and again, this all depends on how you have that routed. In these digital mixers, you route anything to anything. That's the beauty of them. So what we're going to do now is just bring up those 4 auxes. Okay? Those are our master auxes, and we'll turn them on. So that's how that works. And we go back to our recording layer. So now to check this, what you have to do is you have to be able to play on your recorder, your computer or whatever, those channels, and then go to the headphones and check them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a little kind of musical demo where I have all these channels accounted for. and then go to the headphones and make sure everything's coming out of the right channel. Alright, so the way I test this is in the control room. I have this very inexpensive Behringer headphone distribution amp. And I have 8 channels on there, and each channel corresponds to one of the auxes from the console. So what happens is I'll hit play, and let me do that now. So what I did was I set up 4 different little mixes of stuff that I've done. I'm going to turn this down. And so these mixes represent a separate channel. So in other words, I'll put some music, different music on aux 1, different music on aux 2, aux 3, and aux 4. And what happens is, as you bring these channels up, so that's one piece, that's a drum thing. Here's another piece, some opera, and here's another piece, a solo piano thing. So then what I'll do is I will go out into the studio and I will put on the headphones and make sure that all those channels correspond to what I put on the channels that the musicians will be hearing. So you see a mixer here. This is just a cheap Alesis mixer. And I'll turn up these channels to check them. And everything's there. And I do that with the corresponding channels on all the mixers. And you see they're running now. And I make sure they're all the same. We'll go to this one. I hear that already. Turn down the channels. And there we go. And we got one more to check in the drum booth. Turn this one on. And marimba, drums, opera, solo piano. So that's it. And that's how it's done. So this is the setup that I ended up with. See it there, and tomorrow I'll shoot a little video when they come in. And this will be the guitar station and the drums that aren't here yet. All the mics are set up, and finally in here the bass, and obviously nothing in here yet. This is the bass setup.
What are we doing with that lick? Are we doing that?
Just getting the setup here.